Spoštovani poslušalci in poslušalke, prav lep pozdrav na današnjem webinarju, ki ga bomo namenili predstavitvi knjige Epidemija pametnih telefonov. Knjiga je pravkar izšla pri založbi Mladinska knjiga v sozaložništvu z Mohorjevo založbo. In zanimiva usodnost tega trenutka je, da se o tehnologiji lahko pogovarjamo prav prek tehnologije in pravzaprav samo prek tehnologije lahko vzpostavimo stik z našim avtorjem, doktorjem Manfredom Spitzerjem. Verjetno so nam seveda ljubši pogovori v živo, zato vas že vnaprej prosim za razumevanje ob morebitnih zumovskih spodrsljajih. Upam pa, da jih ne bo veliko. Pogovor bo trajal 45 minut, nekaj minut na koncu bomo namenili tudi morebitnim vašim vprašanjem. Potekal bo v angleščini, bo pa posnetek vsem na voljo na spletni strani mladinska.com, opremljen tudi s podnaslovi. Veseli me, da lahko med nami pozdravimo tudi avtorja knjige Epidemija pametnih telefonov, doktorja Manfreda Spitzerja. Naj ga pred začetkom samo na kratko predstavim. Nekoliko ga že poznamo. Slovenijo je obiskal ob izidu knjige Digitalna demenca. Sicer pa je doktor Spitzer študiral medicino, psihologijo in filozofijo, se habilitiral na področju psihiatrije, vodil je univerzitetno psihiatrično kliniko v Ulmu in tudi center za nevroznanost. Kot mi je zaupal tik pred začetkom webinarja, je objavil že več kot 50 knjig, ki so prevedene že v 20 jezikov. Sicer pa je eden vodilnih raziskovalcev v Nemčiji in tudi sicer v svetu, ki se ukvarjajo z vprašanjem učinkov digitalne tehnologije na kognitivni razvoj ljudi. So now welcome, Mr. Spitzer. I'm glad we can host you again. We met 3 years ago. And I'm happy that Mladinska knjiga decided together with Mohorjeva založba to publish another book of yours entitled The Smartphone Epidemic. So the title of the book was created a few years ago. I think that in Germany the book was published in 2018, am I right?
Yes.
But I suppose, you didn't know that we were about to face COVID-19 pandemic, did you?
No, that was, of course, unexpected. And I probably would call the book now The Smartphone Pandemic. But back then, I thought many people probably don't know what the pandemic is. So epidemic is quite well known. So it didn't occur to me, even though I spent a few seconds on that thought, but then I thought, no, epidemic is enough. Even though the smartphone is the real pandemic, it affects 5 billion people on this globe, 5 billion plus people on this globe. So if there is any pandemic, it's the smartphone pandemic, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there is an interaction between the smartphone pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic in that because of not the virus, but because of our responses politically and economically and with our society, what we do with the virus and lockdowns, school closures, etc. That is made worse by the smartphone pandemic. So because during lockdown, a lot of screens are out there and they really don't help you to do a good thing with the much time that you have, the increased amount of time that you can spend. I probably should something at the very beginning, because it's often said, well, it's so boring. So what can we do? And I thought about this recently a lot. And in fact, there is a lot of research on boredom. And if you carefully look at the neuroscience and the psychology of boredom, it turns out that boredom is a bit like pain. We don't like it. Nobody likes boredom, okay? And so if you think about it, what is pain about? Pain is about a state that you want to avoid and you want to get out of as quickly as possible. If you put your hand on a hot plate, it really is not fun. So you're ouch, and there you go, and your hand is off the hot plate. And the reason is that's not good for your hand to be in that state of kind of, well, getting burned. And boredom is a similar state. And what people normally do when they get bored, they stop doing what they're doing and think about, isn't there anything better that I could do? And that happens if it's, well, too boring, if you are at a task that is actually not demanding at all, or if the task is too demanding. So if you're not getting anything, it's boring, just as when everything is too easy, okay? And so if you think a bit about why is this? Well, it's because human beings carrying around this big brain. And this is costly in terms of the calories it needs, etc. So you want to use your brain because it's there anyway. And whether it is just idling or doing something, no matter what it does, it consumes a lot of energy. So if you are bored, it's a little existential crisis telling you you should not waste your time doing something that you already can do so well, or you can have no idea what you're doing. So get to your sweet spot in learning and change what you are doing. Make it more demanding, but not too demanding. And so what you should aim for is what we call flow. And in the flow, time flies, and you're learning a lot. You are immersed. You are happy, actually, much happier than during boredom. And so if this is what you should do when you are bored, then there's one thing you must not do, and that is it's called killing time, or try to get sort of switch on your smartphone and do something. Because that doesn't help you to solve the problem that you have, and that is get to something interesting. Okay, so to fight boredom by tapping on your smartphone, it's like drinking seawater when you are thirsty. Everybody knows that's not good, because if you're thirsty, you want to get rid of ions in your system, and you need clean water for that. And if you drink the ions in the salt with the water doesn't help you to get rid of the salt. So sailors know if you drink ocean water, you die earlier. And so it's, even though it's you swallow a fluid. To kill time when you are bored is just like drinking seawater when you are thirsty. You must not do it, because it's really the wrong thing to do. Okay, and this happened during the Corona pandemic a lot. So I mean, millions of hours of lifetimes of young children were wasted by just, daddling along screen media. And that kind of strikes me, and I worry about this, because the long-term consequences, they are just there.
I agree. Well, actually, you have almost answered my next question, because, I mean, we cannot avoid today's reality, and we cannot pass the COVID situation right now. I mean, in Slovenia, it is much better now. Children went back to school, which is good. But actually, I mean, some shops are open, but still we will need quite some time to recover. And I wanted to ask you, where are, I mean, the smartphone epidemic or pandemic, if you want. I mean, there are some common characteristics with this COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, it is a special state. I mean, many things have actually changed.
Yes. Let me give you a few examples to illustrate that, how these things really interact. In the medical literature, we talk about another pandemic. It's called the Inactivity Pandemic. And in fact, it's in the really good English globally published literature, for example, in The Lancet, a long paper on the inactivity pandemic that we have, in particular among children. They don't go out, they don't do enough physical exercise, etc. So we have overweight kids, and overweight children will become overweight adolescents, they will become overweight young adults, and this will cause, well, diabetes, high blood pressure, and all kinds of problems, including actually cancer, and in the long run, strokes and heart attacks. And this is and these are the killers number one. So we do have a problem here, and the corona pandemic does make this worse. So I got emails from teachers saying, well, after the first lockdown last spring, I saw my kids after about 7 or 8 or 10 weeks of school closure, and I was shocked. They had all gained 10 to 15 kilograms. And this is really bad for health. Well, let me give you another example of another pandemic that's in the medical literature. It's called the Myopia Pandemic, so short-sightedness. And in fact, short-sightedness is a real problem in Southeast Asia. In South Korea, they have about 95% of younger people being short-sighted, people under 20. In China, it's 80%. In Europe, it's about 30 to 50% on the increase in the under 20-year-olds. Now you might say, okay, let's have them wear glasses. And that's one reaction. And the other is, we knew that. And it used to be because of reading books. And it's called school myopia. So schooling makes you short-sighted because you read a lot. But it turns out, even though that was actually known for 140 years by now, that yes, schooling gets you up in terms of, I mean, we all have this concept of this bright kid with thick glasses. And that's actually quite correct, because if you read a lot, you learn a lot, and then your eyes grow too long, and then you need glasses. But reading is actually no longer a problem. In Germany, the average adolescent reads about 15 to 20 minutes a day. That won't do any bad to your eyes. But it turns out that the smartphone has two characteristics that are in combination really bad, because smartphones are the most widely used, with over 5 billion smartphones out on this globe, and they are most frequently used among any screen media. And on top of this, they are the smallest screens. So when you read a book, normally you read a book at half a meter distance. You often read a smartphone 25 centimeter distance. That has been found out. They measure things, etc. And now you wouldn't believe, there are data from China showing that during the lockdown in Wuhan and surroundings, people measured the growth of the eye. So and if it's getting too long, you get myopia, short-sightedness. And so Chinese authors, they published this in January 2021. So it came out last month, basically, or well, second last month. And they could show that during 2020, the spring, myopia was accelerated about 3 times. So there was a larger growth spurt of the eye during the pandemic lockdown and school closures, because kids spent their time in front of mostly of their smartphones. And so the Chinese actually responded to this. Do you know what they did? After this had come out by this Chinese author in a high-power American medical journal, the day thereafter, the Chinese government banned smartphones from all schools, which is a large measure, because schooling in China had been done basically with a smartphone. Homework was assigned by a smartphone. They had school apps. They did the homework on the smartphone or using their smartphone. So saying we are going to ban smartphones from schools because of this myopia pandemic that got much worse because of Corona is a strong and a really a big measure and the big step the government has taken. But the government basically figured, hey, well, if we keep having 80% myopic people in the generations to come, 80% of 1.3 billion, that's about 1 billion myopic people. And since myopia is a risk factor for blindness, because it can give you glaucoma, cataract, macular degeneration, and retina detachment. And these are the 4 major causes of blindness. And so you can do the math. And the Chinese government must have figured, well, if we keep doing what we're doing, in a couple of decades, we are going to have 100 million, and that is a conservative estimate, 100 million blind people. No way. That's what happened in other parts of the world. So here you have a clear sign that people thought, oh, there's something going wrong, we have to act responsibly, and they did act responsibly. And we know the Chinese are really strict. If they mean it, they really mean it. And in Wuhan, they did a much harder lockdown than any place else on the world. They actually didn't lock them down in their homes. They quarantined people, and millions of people in special purpose buildings for that. So that's hardly known in the West, but this is what happened, which is also why you had mental problems, and people had really problems during this lockdown phase in Wuhan. They succeeded in getting the pandemic down by these, I mean, real tough measures, but they saw the danger and they responded strongly. And if I may add, the eyes are developmentally a part of the brain. So we are talking not just eye development, and you need to look at long range in order to get proper eye development. And for the whole brain, it's obvious you need to use your whole brain and not just, flip through things. Actually, I've done rounds today. I met a patient, a schizophrenic patient, and he was with his smartphone. And I asked him, why are you on your smartphone? And his answer was quite correct. I need not think doing anything when I do anything on the smartphone. So I asked, why don't you read a book? Well, that's not as easy as, I mean, his answer was, I'm at the smartphone because I don't have to think when I am. Okay. So I told him, well, this is the worst thing for you to do, because if you have cognitive deficits, you must train your brain. I mean, in particular, if you have cognitive deficits caused by the disorder. So it's twice, doubly the wrong thing to do. It's like having weak legs and then say, oh, I no longer walk. So the legs will get much weaker because of this. So you must train harder when you get weak legs instead of no longer use them. And same with the brain. So this gives you an idea that I think the corona pandemic really made the smartphone pandemic much worse. Yes.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, this new data. I was wondering, I mean, with this Chinese experience, I mean, what did they do? Did they use then classical textbooks instead of smartphones? I mean, it's a very fast switch, I would say.
Yes, they try to switch back to books. You just look at longer range at books, or they went back to blackboards, because if kids look at a blackboard, that's even further out, and then you write that big on the blackboard, that's 5 meters away. So this is even better for eye development. So they go really old-fashioned with the huge blackboards and chalk. And,
and there is also exactly. And there are also some studies saying that there are many cognitive benefits with handwriting comparing to keyboard writing. So, I mean, the role of the body is very important also for the cognitive development.
Yes, there's actually a brilliant modeling study that came out in Science magazine. So they looked, well, these days you can research learning by looking at machine learning, because the machines that do machine learning, they work like brains. They get new experiences, and the experience changes the connections between simulated neurons in those machines. So now you can look at those machines, how do they learn? And it turns out if you train these machines with a foreign vocabulary and scripture, and if you let them process not just the image of a character, but also the motor efforts that you have to do in order to produce it, then you learn reading much faster. So even though reading doesn't have to do with any motor thing, but if you learn the motor performance of writing, you learn reading better. And this has been shown again on by means of a computer learning how to read. So you better have them right, okay? And that's an amazing study. You can really look at the performance with motor action and without, and then and in fact it turns out that the computer would just processes visual information is much worse than human beings in learning. It takes much longer. The computer needs to process more examples than we do until we get it, okay? But if you implement the motor programming and motor commands and teach them as well, the computer becomes as fast as a human being. So that was another interesting finding, that in order to make the computer as good as human beings at learning how to read and write, you have to train the computer the motor aspects of reading and writing.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And also well, but anyway, let us go back to the book. I mean, I need to introduce you to our participants. I mean, well, we have actually discussed many topics which are in the book. I mean, the book is has 15 chapters, and it is subtitled "The Interest for Health, Education and Society." I mean, you told us quite a lot about problems with health, with the overuse of smartphones. But let us go a bit deeper. I mean, it's not only overweight and depression, it also changes the relationship among us. I mean, it is especially important for young people. I mean, how to connect, and it's very important, and it's really quite a big difference being a friend by a smartphone or being a friend in person. I mean,
yes, I think in order to be more specific, we can certainly distinguish physical side effects, physical health side effects, okay, mental health side effects, but also educational side effects. And on top of this, side effects as regarding the society. And I mean, couple the smartphone with the last American president giving you alternative facts or wrong facts, so to speak, but talking about them as though they were right. Then you confuse people a lot. And this is what happened in the US. They even had their capital stormed by a mob because they were told, go there and kick them out and let me be the winner of the election. And that basically told you how our society has changed due to the ubiquitous availability of pictures on smartphones and on false information on smartphones. And in a few chapters in the book, I outlined how these mechanisms work. For example, that if you combine Twitter with human curiosity, then it turns out you will have a spread of false news, because false news, they are just more interesting than correct news. If I tell you 2 and 2 plus 2 is 4, you won't retweet that if I send this as a Twitter message. But if I tell you the Pope is pregnant, and you say, oh wow, this should not be the case on at least 2 counts. And well, my best friend tells me the Pope is pregnant, so I better retweet this to all of my friends. And so and this is why false news spreads so fast. And as long as there's going to be human curiosity and Twitter, we are going to have fake news. And it's not Twitter alone. It is the interaction between our human curiosity and Twitter that produces false news. And once you realize that, you see that the problem is actually a deep problem. If there's no gatekeeper for information, and I mean, there used to be editors and journalists, and they thought about things. Can we publish this? Is it correct, etc. Now everyone can publish anything, and people out there are often helpless and hopeless in deciding for themselves: is this correct and that correct? And so and this is sometimes in the social media decided by the majority, and the majorities can be wrong. So and this is going to be a problem that will be hard to solve, because what we also don't want is information policy and restriction of informational freedom. So we want freedom of speech. But we also want to couple this with some form of responsibility and accountability. I'm not sure whether you have corona deniers in Slovenia, but in Germany, that's a big problem. There are a few doctors out there who deny corona, and I think this is completely irresponsible. I mean, in medical circumstances or in medical environments, falsity is not only wrong, it can be deadly. Which is why we have to stick to the truth, and truth is really important. So in my view, we're going to have to come to grips with this, but it won't be easy. We don't want total control, but we don't want let loose anybody with any message, that nonsensical or not. So we have to find middle ground, and this is not going to be easy.
Well, it seems to me that, I mean, the main problem is how to raise and keep this cognitive capability of thinking. And I'm wondering, I mean, how will this generation immerse in this multitasking and also digital mediums? I mean, how they will learn to develop this critical thinking, reflection and empathy. And what do you think about it? Is it possible? I mean, it's very hard because
well, let's start with cognition, that is not with emotions, but with cognition. I think one thing is already very clear, that the younger the kids are, the more they are hurt by screen media. We know that you can't learn your mother tongue from screens. You need real human interaction. Once you know one language, you can learn a second one with the help of screens, but not just from screens. You need some starting process that, again, is about human interaction. So we know that. And now with the smartphone, we think we do something good when we say, kid, you have a smartphone and now you can Google everything for yourself. But the problem is that in order to use search engines, no matter which search engines, you need to have knowledge beforehand in order to make sense of what the search engine gives to you. And if you type in anything on Google, you get anything. You get nonsense and interesting stuff, but if you know nothing, you can't distinguish which is which. And in fact, people always then say, oh, well, we just need media literacy, and then this will solve the problem. And I must clearly state, this is just not the case. There is no general purpose capability to decide right from wrong. I mean, take a statement about, history or politics or physics. There is no way to, this must be right and this must be wrong. I see it because if you know physics, you can easily identify this formula is wrong. And if you don't know physics, it just looks as a right formula, it's just another formula. Same thing with if I wanted to know about Ming vases and I would type in Ming vase, I would get any kind of trash about Ming vases and some nuggets of interesting stuff. But because I know nothing about vases and Ming vases in particular, I better buy a book by an expert on the Ming Dynasty, and then he will take me by the hand and introduce me to the major concepts and the major art things that happened there, etc., etc. So to say, oh, the internet is everything out there, and once I'm connected, I can figure out everything. Not really. Of course, you can try a YouTube beginners in Mingva's course, etc. You can do that, but still you don't know, is this a hoax? Is this a trustworthy person or not? And if you buy a book, well, there has been an editor, there has been a publisher. If they would always edit and publish rubbish, they would be broke. So you can have some trust in the traditional media, and you can have not any trust in stuff that's on the internet, because any crazy person can bring out anything. So this is another problem as regards the knowledge society. It is wrong to think just broadcast the cloud in every corner of the world and then people will become educated. It used to be thought once with the TV about 65 years ago. They said, well, now that we have TV, we can bring education to the farthest corner of the globe. Well, what did they bring there? Some soap operas and other pretty dumb things. And if there's one thing that's clear, is that TV didn't bring the education revolution that people thought 65 years ago it would bring. And it's the same thing with the internet and digital information technology. On itself, it doesn't change anything. If you have good content, that in the long run is good to have this and to link it to educational activities, but we are far from that. And again, in order to use screens, you need to have pre-existing information that has already to be in there in order to be able to use search engines wisely and effectively. And the more you become an expert, the better you can use you can use information technology for giving the expert more information. As a doctor, I can Google in medicine. If a layperson types in headache, he will be brought in contact with brain tumor in 0.1 seconds, and then will stick for 1.5 hours with brain tumors, and then will be quite well, hypochondriac in the worst case, and will worry a lot and probably have a bad night's sleep, because worrying about your headache and upon you dying is not a good idea. But Google doesn't distinguish between frequent and not so frequent causes of headaches, and it brings you the worst case stuff, and that's actually called Morbus Google. And there's a chapter on that one in the book as well. And so this is actually, it costs a lot, because patients go to another doctor, they look for second opinions, etc., etc. And it costs the German healthcare system about 1%. And that sounds little, but if you think that Germany spends about 1 billion euros per day on medicine, that's about 365 billion euros a year. 1%, it's 3.5 billion. So it's a significant amount of money that we spend for the people who Google and then go to another doctor. Okay, so we should do something about this, and we should make this clear that if you are an expert, you can use information technology for your great for great stuff and for your enlightenment and for getting to the right information. But in order to evaluate the information, you have to think about this, and you have to have pre-existing knowledge. Without that, no way.
What about the impact on emotional development, especially for young people? I mean.
Well, with emotions, it's even more obvious than with language or knowledge. Emotions you basically learn in human contact. So if you just to make it very simple, if you talk 10,000 times to 100 people, and then you will know how to judge their posture, their facial movements, their language melody, and the way they gesture, etc., in terms of what emotions are presently there in this other person. So you know, if you see a tear, that he or she is not happy. When you see the first tear, you don't know what that is. But if you have enough interactions with real people, once you got 10,000, I say 10,000 because we know that expert knowledge is about, practicing things 10,000 times, or for 10,000 hours. So if you practice human interaction for a long time, you don't have to ask this person, how do you feel? You look at the person and you know how the person feels. We call this empathy. And because of the emotions, you can also do the cognitive equivalent of empathy. That is, you put yourself in the shoes or within the skin, or we have different idiosyncratic expressions for this in various languages. In Germany, we put ourselves into the other's perspective, skin or shoes, and in every culture this is done, and this is kind of, you think how he or she thinks because of the emotions that you see, and this is the cognitive aspect of empathy. And if you look at a sad person, you may just as well feel sad, in particular if that's a person with whom you are close. So sadness is contagious in this respect, and so that happens too, and this lets you relive the emotions of the other people, and then you can feel the emotions of other people, and that helps you to really understand these other people, and that's something that guides your action. And let me give you a striking example. In Germany, we have cases where people die on the street because of a car or motorcycle accident, and then there's a passerby, and the passerby is filming the dying person, not helping and talking, no, filming, and then putting the film on the internet. And in Germany, our present government has already on 2 occasions discussed a new law that we are going to get. It's about, you don't film dying people. And I think this is a terrible sign of a society that's getting rid of empathy. I mean, we did have film cameras for 100 years, and we didn't need to have this law. Now that we have smartphones, you may argue, well, everyone has a film camera, high resolution in his pocket, so now we need the law. But I think until about 10 years ago, it was clear that you don't film a dying person. You help the person. You stand by, you do whatever you can to make to help in the last hour of this person. And no longer so. People step over other people and do other things and just don't care. And I think this lack of empathy that has really been demonstrated in high power science journals. That scares me, actually. It really scares me. It's not just, something that you think, oh, we need more bright people, better educated people. We don't have them. So yeah, that's scary too. Particularly in Germany, our only resource is intelligence. We don't have, gas underground or oil. We just have good ideas and people with good ideas. So it's scary to have less well-educated people. I think it's even more scary to have non-empathic people around. They're like zombies. And I don't want to live in a society where the zombies walk around and don't care about one another. I think that's really scary. And this is what the smartphone does to our society. That's known. It's not my personal opinion. I mean, there are studies about this clearly showing this. And once you realize this, you really think we need to act, and we need to protect our children, at least early in their development, from this technology, because it doesn't do them any good. It hurts them, which is why I basically wrote this book. Hey, parents, the lobby tells you, buy your kid a smartphone because they make money out of this. And then once the kid has a smartphone, it will use it. And then the kids' time will get monetized, as they say. And so this is about money. It's not about fostering brain development of this kid. No, it's hurting brain development. And we should not allow, well, half a dozen, actually the richest companies on earth, all in California or South Korea or China, to make money by hindering the development of our kids, emotionally, cognitively, educationally, and even physically with regards to their bodies. I think if we let this loose and if we allow this to happen, we act irresponsibly. And this is I think the deep and very profound message in my book. Hey, everybody who takes care of young people who are in their developing phase, please take care of not having them too much screen contacts, particularly with the smartphone.
Well, that was one of my questions. I mean, what would you suggest to Slovene parents and teachers as well? I mean, how to protect our children and also how to, in a way, discipline ourselves as well. I mean, it's so, in a way, we are getting in the same direction, all of us. It's so hard to invest. Well, I think that many of us need to protect, I mean, and to make some effort to invest more and more intellectual effort to our everyday life. But it's quite hard. I mean, how to protect first ourselves and then our children as well.
Well, first of all, parents must know
Yeah.
that they are the role model for everything the kid's doing, even though the kids may quarrel and may not by what they say, hey, you are so great, I will try to become like you. That's what kids never do. But unconsciously, if you sit like this while eating, they will put out their smartphones and look at it while eating. So, and you don't want that. So if you don't want smartphone use during dinner, don't do it yourself. And then if your kid pulls it out, say, we don't want this at the dinner table, period. And by the way, Bill Gates did that, Stephen Jobs did that. So all the big names in artificial intelligence and computer science, they all do that. They protect their kids from the negative effects of this technology, and they know there are these negative effects. So why don't we all do it? Okay. And there are some things that are often stated, they are plainly false. And one is, well, we must get our kids acquainted with the technology. Only when they are acquainted early on, they will become competent users. This is nonsense, because again, this technology fosters addiction to the technology and impairs brain development. So because of these two facts, for example, they regard alcohol as well. Alcohol makes you addicted, and alcohol is bad for brain development. This is why we don't do alcohol competency training in kindergarten, a little schnapps a day. So we get to used to that, okay? We don't do this because it's not good. In fact, we just do the opposite. We try to protect our kids from alcohol until they are old enough, the brain old enough and mature enough and developed enough such that they themselves can be in control of their alcohol use. I'm a psychiatrist. I do know that even adults, many adults, don't get to the stage where they can control it, okay? But with kids, no way. Now, the smartphone. Smartphones are addictive. That's what the medical literature says. Again, that's not my opinion. That is what's in the medical literature. There are certain features that give you interesting stuff. It's like a bit like gambling. You get, and in fact, gambling is often built in gaming, and it should be not built in. Some countries have forbidden it. The EU hasn't yet. EU-wide, but we are moving towards that because it's particularly bad if you do gambling, and gambling is addictive in itself. So if this is if the smartphone becomes a gambling machine, and it has become a gambling machine, among other things, that's one reason why it gets even more addictive. And smartphones, again, hurt brain development because it stops you using your brain a lot, which is why it doesn't develop properly. So once you know this, you don't say, oh, we have to do media literacy training in kindergarten or elementary school. No, during this time frame, you have to protect your kids from this technology, okay? We are doing badly at this. I have been in Scandinavian countries where the average age where the kids get this first smartphone is about 8. And you must not give an 8-year-old a smartphone. This is really hurting the kid. It's completely irresponsible, okay? Then people ask me, Professor, at what age would you allow? And then I say, you know what? At what age would you allow your daughter to go to the red light district in the inn where the mafia bosses meet and work out their next criminal acts? And parents say, oh, no way, I would ever let my daughter go there. And then I say, you know what? Smartphone is it's the biggest red light district, access to the biggest red light district on this globe, and access to a criminal scene, from mobbing to little nudgings for you paying a few cents, not noticing it, to scams that sell you services that are not services, but just drag your money out of your pocket, though you don't even notice it. So the smartphone and the internet is full of pornography and full of criminals. You must realize that. And you don't give the access to this to an 8-year-old, not even a 12-year-old, not even a 14-year-old. Well, at one time, kids will want a smartphone and they will use their smartphone. But again, parents tend to say, and they are just papaguying, or they are just saying what they get told all the time. That is, you get mobbed, you get an outsider if you don't have a smartphone, because everyone has one, so you have to have one too, just for the reason that everyone has one, you have to have one. But this is nonsense. I have a 12-year-old daughter. She doesn't have a smartphone. She's the only in the class without a smartphone. But everyone talks to her. She's not mobbed, because these days you get mobbed by the smartphone. If you don't have one, you don't get mobbed. Okay, and if you don't have a smartphone, every kid in the class talks to you. So they all know her and she knows all of them very well. Much better when you just type 2 or 3 words in chatting, etc. So she's actually not hurt at all. Her social life is not hurt at all, but she's doing fine, very well actually. And so I would hurt her if I gave her a smartphone. And in fact, I told her a number of times when she asked me, Dad, when will I get my own smartphone? I said, you know what? When you were 3, you wanted a lot of candy. I didn't give you candy. And you know what? Your teeth are fine. And you're not fat. And you would have ruined yourself, your teeth and your body shape, by eating as much as candy as you would have liked back then. Now you want a smartphone. But you know what? I know better. And I do know that smartphones are not good for kids. So if I gave you a smartphone, I would actually hurt you. And you are my kid. What can I say? I just don't want to do bad and prevent you from reaching your full potential, which is why you don't get a smartphone. And I asked your grandmother, grandfather, and uncle and aunt this and this not to give you a smartphone either. And because it will not be good for your development in the next coming years. And she kind of swallows that. Okay, and she knows I'm Mr. No Smartphone, well known in the country for this, etc. So I think she realized she is just bad luck in being the daughter of this man. But the older she gets, the more she realizes my dad is onto something. And I know quite a few adolescents who write me email and say when they are 14, 15, or 16, Dr. Spitzer, I saw you on YouTube, and some even read a book written by myself. And then I say, you know what? You changed my life. I threw away my smartphone, and since then, I am so happy. Thanks. I get emails every day like this. And I know this is workable and this is manageable and this can happen. So just keep going through this difficult time. I say all parents, once they will get over this, they will say, thank you for doing this. That was the right thing to do.
Actually, we have just received one question. Is it possible not to use a smartphone nowadays? And I suppose this is your answer. I mean,
well, my answer is sure. It's possible not to use the smartphone. It's possible not to use alcohol these days, even though it's everywhere. Lead used to be everywhere, in our water pipes, in the gas we put into our cars. But it was found out that children with more lead in their blood were not as bright as children with less lead in their blood. So once this was found out, we got rid of lead pipes for our water. We got rid of lead in gasoline. And because we just didn't want our kids to become less bright. This is what smartphones do. We really don't want smartphones to hurt the cognitive and emotional and social development of our kids, but they do. Just to give you a little more data, it's all in the book. If you are a girl and you spend at age 13 more than 3 hours on Facebook, which a lot of girls 13 do, okay, your chances to become depressed at 18 double. This is a big British study that showed this. So doubling the chance of being a depressed young woman is actually a big thing, because depression is one of the biggest disorders in young women. So we are talking about a frequent illness getting twice as frequent. We are not talking a few cases. We're talking tens of thousands of cases, even in your country. Okay, and in my country, it's hundreds of thousands of cases. So, and again, this is not my opinion. This is a fact published in the good scientific literature. And the lobby who tells you, no, it's all fine, and they have no data. They never produce any data. They just say things and they say it's obvious and we have to do this. But this is all sponsored by big companies. We do know that the digital lobby is the richest lobby on this globe. They spend most money by telling you lies about the effects of smartphones. And you just must not buy into this. It's as simple as that.
Sure. Well, we received another question. What about the impact of television on young children?
Well, television, there is a lot of research on television, because television is around, as I said, for 65 years. And 20, 30 years ago, already good studies came out showing that TV basically prevents brain development. So the more you use your TV at 5, the less educated you are at 18. It really reduces your chances to get a good education. And again, this is TV at 5. TV at 15 also has a bad effect on education, but not as bad as your TV consumption age 5. So again, just with smartphones, same thing is true with TV. The earlier the use, the more harmful it is in the long run, okay? So TV interferes with education. It interferes with physical activity. Just because you spend time on screen, you don't run around. And so your body weight actually increases with every hour of TV you do a day. And thirdly, your social competency and your social life is actually getting worse. People who spend more time on TV, they get inattentive, and they also get more aggressive. It's often debated in the literature, and some say, we have recent studies, so the link between real aggression and aggression on TV is not so big or even non-existent. Wrong. We have the best evidence in the very good studies showing that there is a link between media aggression and real aggression. In fact, given the internet, we have now clear evidence that there is a link between hate speech and hate crime and aggression. It has been shown in using Twitter feeds. And so the more hate there is on Twitter, the more violent crime there really is in that area. Okay, you can do an area by area analysis, divide, for example, Germany in about 10,000 areas, and then you check how much Twitter use is there and how much Facebook use is there and how much violence is there, and you see a clear connection. So this has been done. It's actually a study that came out this week showed that bad behavior against women, misogyny is it called, so you put down women, okay, is the Twitter put down, the putting down on women on Twitter. If you parcel out the countryside they did this in the United Kingdom, clearly correlates with violence against women. So that's also been shown by now. So there is this correlation between what you do in the virtual world and what you do in the real world. So it does matter if your boy kills monsters for hours a day, or if your girl is in Facebook for hours a day. It really hurts their development.
Okay, thank you. We have received many questions, but unfortunately we won't be able to answer all of them. But maybe there is one question which was sent even before our webinar. Mrs. Sabina is asking the following. Today, many children spend their free time with a mobile phone and don't take time or even have no interest in play and creations. How important is artistic creation, I mean drawing, painting, for the development of children's brain?
Well, very important, but let me back this up with the interesting science that came out in the last couple of years. Some of which is in my book, some of it is too new to have been able to make it into the book, but the stuff is coming out. So we do know, for example, that if you have a 5-year-old watching a fast-paced video, it will be fascinated by the screen. And people often tell me, Professor, they are so captured, their attention is they're fully immersed in this fast-paced video. So this cannot be bad because they are so glued to the screen. And it turns out that if you look at brain activity, you do get a lot of activity in the visual centers when you have to process, flickering screens with fast content. And then there is a lot of noise, I mean, shouting and music and everything. So your auditory system also has a lot to do. So that seems to be good. So a lot of training goes on. Yes and no. And the reason is this. If you read a book to your child at 5 years of age, you can show what happens in their brains is you read the story of Cinderella with blonde hair or whatever, then what the children do is they use their language comprehension of you reading them a story to make their own cinema in their visual centers. So they imagine this blonde girl with the long hair and the pink dress and the castle in the background, who knows what, and the frog and kissing with the crown and all this. Okay, so what the brain of a 5-year-old listening to a story is doing basically is the language centers connect to the visual centers and tell them, now do this, do a tree, fill in with a castle, now fill in the figure. And it's all in your head, okay? So what turns out is the connections between your language comprehension centers and your visual imagery centers, they are getting better because you do connect them both and they are doing the same content, okay? Rather than all this and this working on their own just to crunch the numbers and figuring out what is going on, they are talking to each other, thereby increasing their connectivity, as we say. And this is the prerequisite to become creative, because creativity is oh, let me think about a lion, but it has 7 legs instead of 4, and it is green, and it has ears like a frog. So you have to come up with this in your mental imagery. But if you cannot use your imagery from your language center's perspective, you will be unable to do this type of thinking. So basically what I'm saying is too much screen media use in childhood will greatly reduce the capability of being creative as an adult. And so there is not that much research on this, but I'm glad there is, and all there is really points to developmental deficits that you don't even notice, but they will be there in 20 years. And I think this is the real danger. It is not yet fully clear what smartphone use for 5 to 10 hours a day does to our kids. And to be clear, this is about the amount that they use their smartphone. It's between 5 and 10 hours, in particular during times of school closure and lockdown. And this is, people say we have to find a way, yeah, but this is way too much. And I mean, half an hour may be okay, I don't know, but 10 hours is definitely too much. The dosage makes the poison, they say, and we are way overdosing smartphones. There's no doubt, there can be no doubt about that, given what we know.
Well, thank you very much for all your answers, Mr. Spitzer.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, it was an inspiring conversation, I must admit, and I hope we will have another opportunity to discuss all this. I would like to
do this, sure.
Yes, exactly. It would be great to host you in Slovenia, and I hope we will have another opportunity, maybe with your new book, who knows. But I hope also that you will stay in the front line to help to keep our healthy society. And please do keep on with your research. I'm sure that the whole world needs this research. Thank you very much again.
Well, thank you for listening. I'm a doctor, I'm concerned, and I want to act responsible. That's all. And that's why I do this work. I like doing this work, even though I get even death threats. And sometimes it's not easy, but I think I have to do this. Not doing this and knowing all about, this, what I do know about the brain and how it develops and how it works, it would be irresponsible. And I want to be able to look in the mirror each morning and think, okay, you're doing what you do, and it's good not just for you earning money. No, it's good for other people too. And I get feedback here and there telling me, just as you said, please, Dr. Spitzer, keep going and do what you do and don't get distracted by other people. Well, thanks. I will, yes.
Great, thank you. Spoštovani poslušalci in poslušalke, hvala vam za vašo pozornost. Obljubljamo vam, da vam bomo posnetek, pa tudi odgovore na tista vprašanja, na katera nam ni uspelo odgovoriti v tem času, poslali naknadno v zahvalnem mailu. In v duhu današnjega večera in vsega, kar je bilo povedano, vas povabim, da nocoj odložimo telefone in bodi si beremo, kar očitno je pot, ki pomaga ohranjati miselno vitalnost, ali pa preživimo današnji večer v družbi ljudi, ki so nam najdražji. Lahko noč in vse dobro.